Thank you all for being here. This is a kind of large work in progress because, we're really excited to work with these burgeoning artists in the next few weeks, which is what we're going to be doing leading up to a final web performance, let's say, on July 2nd. And we hope you can join us again for that. And we're going to be working through this virtual space to try to bring about some creativity with music and movement. So that's going to be very exciting for the next month. But today we just, I guess, talking about the foundations, and maybe a little bit about our work together and trying to tie it all into something. And we hope that everybody has questions to ask and things to add and maybe answers to give. And I think you can probably access that through either there's a Q&A or a chat function.
Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, actually, those choreographers who are here, I know, since I was part of selecting them, and in several cases they are pretty established and in the world doing work. And so it's going to be their first time working with me in this role of director and co-directing with Derek. But could the choreographers just kind of give a wave or do a high five with the chat, the reactions? There we have Endelyn Taylor, Brandy Kelly, and we also have Vitor Luis. He'll be coming soon. Finding this.
Yeah, likewise, I see Samantha and Adelia. So thank you for joining us. And probably Ryan will be with us at some point as well. So those are the composers who are going to be participating in this program. So welcome to all of you, and we're really excited for your collaborations.
Great. It's so beautiful to see some of my students from UC Irvine who have also been recruited as dancers, so they will also be participating. And there are some other dancers from different parts of the world, meaning the United States. Sometimes it feels like a world when you're going from one coast to the other. And so they will be meeting the choreographers and composers very soon. So Derek and I, we met in 1990.
Something like that, yeah.
6, I'm going to say.
Okay.
Could it have been that?
Yeah. I won't contradict you. It's all blending together. Yeah, those years.
And we both participated in a similar project to this, but on a longer trajectory of time. We were on a residency program for 3 weeks. And there were 6 choreographers, 6 composers, 25 dancers, 12 musicians. Yes, I think so. Yes.
The idea was to create a new piece every day.
Yes.
So this is something that's kind of hard to imagine when you conceive of it, but actually it was, I don't know, what would we do? We met for breakfast, and then we
met for breakfast. We were given vitamins. Everyone went to the studio. We did a bar or beginning modern class. Everyone, all the musicians, all of the composers were in class together. And then there were similarly 2 directors, a choreographer and a composer, and they basically gave us problems to solve. So that's what we're going to be essentially doing with this group of composers and choreographers. We're going to be creating a problem, and we've got additional problems with Zoom and technology and latency. So we've got an abundance of problems to work with. So the creativity, I'm imagining, is going to be absolutely at its breaking point, right? So, if we break the technology, that's not a bad thing because we learn something about it too. Mm-hmm. We're in a space where it's a laboratory and we were allowed to fail. But Derek and I, we met and we got on like a house on fire. Like at the beginning,
it was like a house
it was. We were like, okay, there was a whole thing happening. We were up till 4 a.m. in the mornings, musicians playing, drinking at the bar, all of that. Amazing. And then Derek and I were looking forward to our collaboration. And this is my version of the story, okay? So...
Okay.
And there were a couple of the projects that were more than one day. So there was one project that actually, they turned it around. We weren't creating on the same day. They gave the musicians, the composers, a day to create a piece and bring us a piece to then perform and create for. So I was really looking forward to working with Derek, because we'd gotten on really well for like maybe 2 weeks. And then he brought this piece of music that to me sounded like an old spiritual. And I said, why are you writing me that piece of music? What are you saying here? Why are you putting me in this box? What's that? What are you saying? Like, and so immediate clash. Like, don't put me in the box. That's one thing that's not. If anybody knows anything about my career, it's like it's not repetitive, right? So feeling like he was reading me and like you're this and adding these things up together. So then we had a conversation with the directors. It was like being at school for a moment, like, we've got conflict between the choreographers and composers. And we weren't the only ones. Other composers and choreographers had moments. And
people left in the middle of the night. I mean, they packed up their stuff and left in the middle of the night. Took a taxi, called a taxi in the middle of the night. Yeah, so
it was intense. And every night we created new work. So we had this problem. And, and I was expected to work with dancers and conceive of this piece. And it just felt like a cliche. If I was just to say as simply as I saw it, it's like, not sure about that. And I sort of felt distant. So Derek, what was your feeling at this point? Why what you wrote and why it felt like a gift to give to me? Because that was the idea. It's like, these people pretty well by now, so write for them. So why did you do it as a gift?
I think my feeling, I had been, in 1992, I'd spent about 4 months in Ghana, and I was studying the xylophone. And while I was there, I picked up a book, which was a book of poetry by different African poets from all over the continent. And there was one poem that really stuck out to me. It was very moving, by a revolutionary poet who was also a doctor, because most of the poets and writers at that time, they did many things. And so he was someone who was friends with Kwame Nkrumah, who was the leader of the revolution that eventually took place in Ghana, and the first president of Ghana. But in any case, I had this poem, and I had always wanted to set it, but I didn't really ever feel like it was the right moment to do that. And then as I got to know Amma, I thought, oh, I could imagine this poem. I could imagine her doing something beautiful with this poem. And so I was really excited, and I went, and there was a singer there. Actually, she was a violist named Mandy. You remember her? And so we worked on this piece together. She actually sang in the piece, and then I kind of delivered it to you, and you were just like, okay, because I think you felt like it was like I was imposing this thing on you, that was very specific, and it's very specifically African American in a way, but also from this kind of African origin, and I think you just didn't know how to engage with that, and I can understand.
Well, what it was I didn't know all of that history, so we were just given the music, and it sounded like, to me, my ear was like, I took this as like a deep old gospel song, so it just felt like, oh, I'm black, that's a cliche, I'll be straight. That's how it felt. And so I did, and so what happened after that was the directors, they came to have a talk with us, and I explained my position, and Derek heard me. And the director of choreography was Bob Cohan, the founder of London Contemporary Dance Theatre. And he said, I think you should do a solo. And so I agreed. And that's what I did. I went away and I made a solo, which I then eventually went on to perform for many years. Because what I was able to do was to get into the full deep meat of what Derek had actually created. And I think that was one of the things was that Derek had actually captured that. The truth was the music actually spoke to me. And so I was a bit affronted. I was like, wait, where's this coming from? So it was a very complicated moment. And not knowing then what I do know now about American culture and the depth to which African culture is imbued within it, in its musical heritage and its forms, you know, outside of jazz, you know, right? I would have said that in relation to jazz, but the entire musical landscape has been imbued with the makings of work and creativity that has been fused and distilled and developed in this space, which is very, very different. But
there's always tension, right, between when something is to get to depth in collaboration requires conflict and tension, and there's going to be that tension. There's going to be that feeling of uncomfortableness because you're coming right up against somebody else's whole being. And of course, in art, when we're vulnerable, that's when we're at our most powerful. And right now, I think a lot of you maybe are feeling vulnerable. I mean, actually, we would love to hear something about how you're feeling right now. And, you know, in the chat, if you,
yes.
You know, and that vulnerability, when that comes in conflict with someone else's vulnerability, you imagine I had this poem. I was like, oh, I connect with this poem. And then we're connecting as people. And I'm thinking, I want to work with, but I didn't know how that poem would connect with another human being, with all the things that she brings to her work. And so that moment, that long moment, you know, those hours, those days, that was tense. And it wasn't even over by the end of the course, as you mentioned, but you went on to perform it many more times and to really make a piece out of it as you made other pieces, as you worked on other solos, like harmonica breakdown and other things.
Sure. But actually, that was the first time I'd ever made a solo, in fact.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. You know, most choreographers begin by making solos, and that's, quote unquote, the training. But actually, my first piece was an ensemble piece from the National Youth Dance Company. So it was actually I really turned inward, and the tones of the song and the poem, it had that space for me to do that, which I don't think I would have been able to achieve with dancers that I didn't necessarily have that depth of relationship with, or even know how to get to very quickly, right? So one can get to certain tensions and connections. Speaking of which, I would love everyone, you're at home, we're in this COVID moment, I would like to ask you, do you have access to a plastic bag or plastic gloves? Because we're going to do something a little bit later. So if you need to go and come, just find that for us, because we may bring that into a space where we want to create a feeling. One of the things that is deeply apparent for us as artists, right? We're not only separated in spaces trying to create, but we're also in this two-dimensional space where we can't feel the other person, or at least not how we're used to feeling. And that's one of the things that the composers and the choreographers are going to be grappling with. Like, how do we bring that constellation of sensory capacities into some kind of registration?
Yeah, and we want to be thinking about how that limitation can actually become an opportunity. I think, you know, right now we're feeling the limitations. We're feeling limitations of democracy. Let's be clear. You know, we're feeling the limitations of our social systems, where everything's stretched to capacity. And how can those become an opportunity is the question going forward. Really, that's a big question for America, for the world in general, where we are right now. And in our art, I think these are the questions. I mean, these are vital questions, and how can we get at those questions in art? These kinds of tensions that Amma is just talking about, an object with tension. How can we create an opportunity to turn that tension into something that allows us to move forward, to move through that tension into something bigger or greater than where it's forcing us to be.
I'm just going to say hello to Martin Pine, because it was Martin's voice on that poem. Martin sitting on the couch. It was Martin.
Oh, Martin. Oh, my Martin.
God. Hello.
And Deirdre. Okay. Lots of friends here. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there was a question that we wanted to ask, which was what are you feeling? To be precise, what are you thinking about most in these days? If you could type it in, because we want to actually share it dynamically in this way, because we're actually going to use these ideas that you share with us now. What is it that you are feeling these days? You otherwise wouldn't have been experiencing.
And even if it's just a word, even if it's 3 words, 2 words, speaking of 3 words, maybe while people are thinking about that, Amma, you could put up some of those photos.
Sure.
Want to save that, or if you want to put them up now?
Sure. So there was a conversation, and there is an ongoing conversation about, you know, this moment, right? So we've had COVID-19. For me, that was and probably for you too, right? The precursor to this real pandemic, the social, historical pandemic of racism, and the scars of that have not healed, and they haven't been even recognized, to the extent that they keep on firing and producing degradation, which is dead bodies that we can all see now in real time, which is incredibly difficult. And there's so many levels of, as we were feeling in the COVID moment, of being controlled, right? We wanted to get outside, or we didn't, or we wanted to protect our spaces. We became each other's enemies, right? 6 feet, don't come to my house, don't, right? This invisible enemy. And then came this moment, or these series of moments that tipped the balance. And like nothing we had imagined that we would see in our lifetimes, we're suddenly in the middle of. And we now are at a change moment where the need to go outside is urgent for young people. It's urgent. It's necessary for people to come together and demonstrate and be and know that the future that we want, that we were talking about euphemistically, like, oh, we're going to be in a new normal, but we don't want to carry all those things and all of these things. But here we are, and now we're overwhelmed with it. We're in a transition. We're in a place of development, and that's what's difficult, because we just want everything to be in a place where we are at ease, where we're at comfort. And I'm talking of our generation, and maybe the generation above us. We didn't experience social unrest. We haven't experienced that. And this is our time for that. And how do then artists respond? Do we just say, well, I'm just going to continue with the project that I was doing and continue to write or perform the thing? Or are we part of the new euphoric space that we're all, or a lot of people are hoping for, right? Are we part of that change, or are we just waiting to see what's going to happen and then hedge our bets with, okay, I'm going to place myself in that space?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm just looking through some of these comments that people gave. Overwhelmed, grieving, hopeless, heartbroken, angry, concerned, frustrated. But then after that, feeling distanced, feeling disconnected, feeling homesick, and then observing, learning, surprising, assumptions no longer valuable, transforming, and deep, relearning, investing in listening, time for investment, sharing and moving. How do we build trust? And then how to be a better ally and caregiver to those on the front lines protesting for equality and change, transformative, deep. So there's a whole range of emotions going on right now. And a lot of them are, people said both very hopeless things and both very positive and optimistic things. So and one thing I want to just talk about is, as an artist, you know, sometimes when we talk about emotions, we often talk about them in very simplistic ways. Like we use one word, we say, I'm feeling sad. But really, it's very rare that we're ever feeling sad, just that. We're feeling sad and hopeful and confused and tense. And I mean, there are so many, emotions are so complicated, so that how do we use art? How do we allow those kind of complex emotions, those tensions, to coexist in a work of art? That's something that we're going to be exploring.
Mm-hmm. And since Derek and I sort of met in this moment of conflict, we're not afraid of it. So hopefully our history will support the choreographers and composers who don't know each other, don't know anything much about each other's background, kind of build that trust very quickly with the view of this is a space of experimental development. So that's what, you know, maximizing on the opportunity. Mm-hmm. So this idea of being able to engage with this moment and that deep listening and learning or relearning is crucial. Derek and I have been crossing over on some images, and I am going to show you, I'm going to share my screen to share a couple of images that I've looked at in terms of the narrative. I think there's one that I have missing. Yikes. But not to worry, I might be able to find it later. Because images are powerful. The human body is powerfully communicating all of the time. As I see you in your spaces, I feel you because I see how you are attending with your body, right? I feel the urge to speak in the way the breath is moving inside of you. And so when we look at an image as a dancer, as a choreographer, we don't just look at the shape. We look into the tensions that the body is showing. So,
and I would say
just
too, in music, you know, tension is the basis of all music, because just physically, I have my clarinet here. The way this thing works is that, you know, you have the clarinet and you have this reed, and the reed vibrates, and it's that tension of the vibration on this mouthpiece that sends air through the column, and that makes it vibrate. Martin knows well that a drum or any kind of percussive instrument, or even a piano, a harpsichord, whatever you want to say, works by tension. So it works because one, you know, a drumstick or a hand hits and puts that body into motion. And our ears are receiving this physical tension, and our eardrum is registering that physical tension. And the same with a string instrument, a violin. You put that string into motion through the bow, and the string vibrates. And so it's always about tension. Everything in music is about tension and release, and we're going to be addressing that.
And so when we were exchanging on this moment, the connection with the screen, finding a way to do that, we came to the notion of breath. And breath is both now a sensory engagement that we all have, that's automatic, but it's also political, like who gets to breathe and who doesn't get to breathe, right? So that there is a massive tension. So we're going to do a short meditation, and out of that, we're hoping that you'll deepen your connection with your breath so that our apparent time here is not only heard but felt, okay? And I'm just going to place an image on the screen, and I may change that image as we go, okay? Right, so I'm just going to share the screen. And of course, you can have your eyes closed. You're welcome to have your eyes closed. And then when you open them, you will see an image.
And I want to just stress to the musicians too, to be thinking about how much breath, how important breath is. No matter whether you play a string instrument or a piano, how important that breath is. When you see a conductor breathe, you know when to come in. It doesn't really matter when they put their hand down, but when you see, you know when to come in. You don't even need the hand. It's really about the breath. And it's the same, so that's the same for string instruments. It's the same for woodwind instruments, obviously, or brass. And it's the same, no matter what instrument you're playing, a drum, anything, it's all to do with the breath. And especially musicians, when, of course, dancers are always thinking about the breath in relation to their movement, but the musician should also be thinking about breath in relation to movement and in relation to you putting sound out. So that there is this tension between reductionist kind of way of thinking, the counting, dividing things up into discrete amounts, and holistic, which has to do with the breath. So let's be thinking about that tension as we look at these images and go into this kind of meditation.
Okay, so sharing my screen, and I'm just going to reduce our images. So in contrast to the image that we are seeing, which is of a group of African American young people with incredibly fun, efforts at designing their crowns. Their hair is adorned in coils and curls, and their eyes are piercing and meeting with the lens of the camera. In your mind's eye, place them in your mind as you breathe in support of their movement, in support of their efforts to be able to breathe unbound. So the effort is to slow down the breath so that this onward journey that we are taking together is paced, is not at the speed of overwhelm. So as you're sitting on your chair, you're slowing down the pace of your breath. Your feet planted on the floor. I just want you to make a gentle action in your ankles as though you are moving, walking. You're articulating through each foot, exploring the bones, the sinews, the tissues on each foot. And allow that rise and fall of your foot to coordinate as though making a sound. Your shoulders are easy. The release in your chest is apparent because you're breathing low down in your abdomen area. You're part of the union of breath that sustains life on the planet. And allowing the torso's undulations to free the head. So we're not sitting to order, we're sitting in relation to our body today. And if your body wants to sigh, allow it to sigh. If the shoulders want to raise, allow the shoulders to raise. And let the shoulders release. And what is it to really slow down in this moment where the world wants us to pick up and change everything overnight? What is it to slow that down with due consideration of the intention to embrace all that is possible and all that is impossible? The imagination leads us to what is possible. And thinking about the backside of the body, where the surface area of the lungs is the broadest. Allow your eyes to open and meet the screen. See the changed image on the screen. Yes. We can stay focused if we remember to breathe. And we stay away from the autonomic system that wants to go into the sympathetic mode of fight or flight. Rest and repose is way down there. If you could sing a note now, what would that note be? Feeling the expanse in the body and the suspension of the breath at the top. So the breath also suspends. It does know how to take a pause before it breathes out. And so with this notion that breathing is a way to find the connection into the possibility of moving, As the music plays, I can be still. Listen, be suspended, and feel. Make possible new foci, because I've been still and I've allowed myself to feel the space around me. So that if I want to go really fast, I can go really fast. Oh. So in Next Fest, improvisation is going to be the key for us to find new ways of being, because this time of COVID-19 and the real pandemic means that we have to improvise, because we have let go of some of the tensions and the boundaries, and it might feel hard for you, but it's okay. It's gonna be okay. Breathe. Well, you know, I think it could just go back to the way it was. It would just be fine. We make some kinds of amendments, and it'll be okay. We'll just, make a few amendments. We'll just put some more cameras around, and we'll make a few grants available, and we'll change the president. Yeah, change the president. And what else can we do? Tell me, what else can we do? What else can we do just to make it, give me some ideas. What else can we do? We can remember. We can remember. We can remember. Remember. Put it back together again. We can put humanity back together again. Did I say remember? Yes, remember. Well, I didn't really have a body before, so how can I remember? The head was separated, the music is separate. We don't remember. Well, wait a minute. I remember a composer called Bach. Wasn't that dance music? Derek? Didn't he remember the dance?
We're putting out, right?
Yes.
Well, Bach.
Yes. Yes.
All Bach's work was dance work. All Bach's music was dance music. Every single, well, not every, not that's not completely true. But all Bach's work, many of the works that we take as being kind of abstract concert pieces were from dance forms, which is why you see the dance forms right there in the title. So, and it's funny because Bach is sometimes seen as such an abstract composer, but actually these were being mapped onto dance forms of the time.
So why did you all do away with the body?
I think doesn't that have to do with a certain kind of reductionist point of view? Because we were, again, talking about the holistic versus the reductionist, and the holistic, the holistic takes everything into account. So all factors, all kinds of artistic work, the visual, all the senses. But once we start being reductionist and we decide to take discrete elements out and deal with just those things, then we're counting and we're dividing. And so, so that.
I see Anna is smiling. Anna, can you tell us what was going on for you?
Yeah.
You broke out into a huge smile, so please tell us.
Well, I'm a violinist who does dance myself, and I play a lot of Bach, and I'm constantly moving when I play any kind of solo partita. And if I know it well enough, then I have to actually do some of the movements I know they did back then when they danced the gigue or when they danced actually an allemande. They would take steps, they would walk, they had a visual pulse as well as a felt pulse. And I think that action to actually move, even while you're playing an instrument, it already changes how you're going to play it the next time. You're no longer going to feel it the same way. You're always going to feel it with that action, with that movement of the body. So I feel it and resonate with everything you're saying right now very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I saw Endelin smiling too. What were you thinking about?
You have to unmute. Who's going to make the first choreography called Unmute?
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I was thinking reduction just in terms of the vastness of it, of reducing it by dividing. Division is what leads to divisiveness, leads to uncertainty. It leads to miscommunication and the importance of communication in community. So I was just thinking, making a broader parallel in terms of what reducing means.
Right, right. Yeah.
And it's interesting because reduction can be very powerful because it allows us to, it's one of those things that allows us to actually notate things. But with that comes some problems. As you say, it's notation in a way is divisive. So that in itself is something interesting to think about, especially for somebody like me who came up learning a lot of music through notation. And of course there's beauty in notation, but there's also a danger because there's a kind of loss of the power of a work. But then there's the ability to transmit it to others through notation, which is an advantage. But being aware of those is so important. Being aware of the limitations of the reductive and the limitations of the holistic, and that tension that always exists between those two things, which is like that tension of the rubber glove. You know, it never lets go. It's always. I don't know if any of you could hear that when we were just doing that performance, improvisation, I was reacting to the sounds around me, and being in Brooklyn, in the middle, I suddenly started hearing sirens, and I didn't know whether you were all hearing the sirens because I could suddenly, I realized that things are on Zoom are compressed, and so sometimes sounds that are not that loud are picked up as being very loud. So I thought, well, if they're hearing the sirens, maybe I should just join the sirens. So I joined them, and as the sirens waned, an ice cream truck came by and started playing a little tune. So that's why I did that. So I was reacting to the sounds around me, actually, because I can't filter them out being here at home, which also creates limitations, but also maybe opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
It jars you out of your bubble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And actually, speaking of which, did everybody find their rubber glove, plastic bag. It's really just to place a tension in your body. So all I want you to do is to just stretch the thing to its, and maybe close your eyes and feel what happens in your upper back and your torso, your lower back, your legs. Now relax it. And now feel the body in its relaxed state. Now put the tension into the body through pulling these apart. Now, those of you who are dancing or dancers, if you were to move with that tension, what would it look like? Like with the fullest of that tension, what would that look like? Like if you wanted to maintain that kind of tension. Any one of you can do this. Everyone is a dancer, right? So we're creating the tension at its maximum. You're finding the tension through the extreme of the body. Now, without holding this, can you maintain that feeling in your body as you're moving? Right? So you're, aha, yes, right? So potentially, I'm thinking about this as one way in which musicians, composers, dancers, we can embody something similar using our sensory system in a similar way to be able to then add another layer of understanding to what it is that we're conjuring through the body. As dancers and choreographers, we do looks very abstract, but we're actually using our body very intentionally. Right? And it looks, quote unquote, easy, but there's a lot of work in it, which is why I wanted you to actually pull that, not just hold it, but actually make it do some, just as you have your bow and there's a whole postural connection that you have to the instrument. Well, we're calibrating and changing that to different registers in order to create and paint with the body. So that's just one thought. And you know, we have within our group of composers, we also have Adelia, who's going to be working with a special need for us to engage in our senses in different ways. So I'm looking forward to Adelia helping us to lead with other senses at the foreground. And this concept, for me, very much relates to Ewe culture. And those of you who have taken embodiology with me will know the term seselelama, which I've loosely made my version of translation, which is knowing the world through the body. And in which case the lead sense is not sight. Sight is part of the sensory system. It's not, doesn't dominate. And so we're really thinking about our intersensory highways. And the imagination is also a very instrumental part of the sensory system, as is our intuition. Right? This notion of five senses, that's a construct. That's some version of measuring and compartmentalizing, right? There are many different approaches to looking at what makes a sense. And the traditional Western views that we have five senses, but there are people that would actually say we have as many as 116 senses. And there are many sensory, biological sensory systems, neurological sensory systems, right? That would denote the interior, as well as the tactile world that we're seemingly measuring through the five senses that we normally register. So again, just thinking like suspending for a moment, allowing the overwhelm or the shift to allow us to kind of go, okay, what is it if I enter this problem or this critical moment through a different doorway?
Yeah. I mean, that's, somebody had typed in proprioception and, just this awareness of what's going on in your body. And, my friend who very well, Wendy S. Walters, the poet, she's always saying to me, she always talks about musician face, which is this kind of very non-expressive face. And sometimes ballet dancers have it too, you know.
Modern dancers too, yes?
Modern, and the idea is to take the emphasis off the face and put it on, you know, it's going to be distracting somehow if you have an expressive kind of facial something going on your face. But I think with musicians, we could do well, certainly, I won't speak for dancers, but we could certainly do well to allow ourselves to have more recognition of what is going on in our bodies while we're doing things. And I'm going to ask all the composers that we're working with to be thinking a lot about what's happening in your body right now. As what are you imagining? Can you move to this music? When you move to it, what do you do? How do you feel the tension? And I'm hoping that that will give us the opportunity as we're working together. And I just put this out as a challenge to everybody to think about how our brain, which has, when we listen to music, our whole brain lights up, right? As opposed to, you know, when we're, say, reading the paper, or when we're maybe when we're making coffee, or we're watching TV, when a very, very small part of our brain is working. But somehow when we're listening to music, and then when we start listening to music and engaging in physicality, even more of the brain lights up. So what does that tell us about the power of art to actually engage a larger part of the brain? As we're making work, we can think about the power that art has when it can access so much more of the brain than just reading words, for example. And I want everybody to, hopefully at this time when people are feeling overwhelmed and maybe even unable to work, to think about that power that art has within it, that's nascent there in your ability to affect change and to reach people on many levels where they would never be reached otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to say, we need to open up for some questions or crosstalk. Adelia has stated in the chat, you know, what to do next, how to make things and the world better. So I'm posing that question to everyone. What to do next and how to make the world better?
And do you feel as artists like you have a special role in this? Or those of you who are artists, maybe some of you are not artists and maybe you have a different role to play in that. But we're curious to hear from you. There's Shoshana talks about the work that she has done in Dalcroze training, and says it's a great way for musicians to think about movement. And I would say the same for Feldenkrais, and a lot of musicians get very much into Alexander technique and become Alexander teachers because of this interest as they start exploring movement and the subtleties of movement. And I would encourage people to do that and think about that when they perform too.
Yeah. Deirdre, you?
Yeah, I did. Hi, everybody. I'm glad
Hi, Deirdre.
Nice to be here. This is quite wonderful. In my own work, my personal work, because it's been a while since I've been expressive as an artist, but I think I'm an artist of hearts and of lives, so I have a different role that I play now and have been playing for a number of years. But one of the things that has come up time and time again is our inability to ask. To ask. We make assumptions. We have our snap to judgments that we go to because we use that file cabinet that is the compendium of all of our past experiences, either with that person or with that group or in that situation. And as soon as we start feeling some kind of way, we go right to the file cabinet and we go, there it is. Yep, I remember that. Yep, that's right. I got it. And that's not always necessarily the way it is. We come to conclusions on the basis of our experience, but we have no idea, aucune idée what the other person is experiencing or understanding or feeling at that particular point in time.
Yes.
So the question is, or maybe the word is empathy, but empathy empathy is something that you get to way after you've waded through all of this, this assumption and calculating, and so there has to be, I believe, a relationship to truth, which is your personal truth, but not the truth that you want to tell, the truth that is telling you from inside yourself. And once that emerges, you are able then to be authentically empathetic, because we, when we see shit like we've seen on social media in this last week, the first thing you want to do is fall apart, But you can't fall apart.
Yes. And with that, I just want to bring in Brandy's point. Thank you, Deirdre. That ricochets on for sure. You've given a lot to think about. Thank you. Brandy, do you want to elaborate on what you put in the chat?
Yeah. I'm currently in the school building. I teach in a public school system, and I'm also a creator and an art maker, but I'm in the school building right now, and this meditation has really gotten me back into school mode, even though my students aren't here. So I'm thinking a lot about education. And Dr. Wray has been really inspiring. When I worked with her in creative process and in improvisation, in embodiology, improvisation is something I put far more heavily into my jazz practice in a classroom setting, as it should be, but I experienced that with my students this year. And I think giving them opportunity for choice making and giving them opportunity to experience what others' choices are and being able to then reflect, because I think the bodily experience and viewing is important, but I think also the reflection process of hearing, as Deirdre said, somebody else's experience. And it's, simple, and it's not always, getting to these larger issues, but we're planting seeds, I think, in that way. And that's just what resonated with me.
And something that...
go ahead.
Something that I've been thinking about today, which came out in the meditation, was the speed of things and the discomfort with the change. And I also feel really, in response to your question, Adelia, is that this is America first, right? Because this is where we are, but this is not only America, right? America was born out of Europe. And my friends in England are saying, hello, that's exactly how deaths happen in the UK, is by force. It's not by the gun. This is happening here. Hang on, wait a minute. What's going right? And this decade, this is the decade of people of African descent. The UN make these decades, and this is that decade. So for me, what needs to permeate out of this moment is thinking about indigenous peoples wherever they are in the world and the knowledge that they carry. That is the knowledge that I bring partly into embodiology, and the much more that I have not been able to even register, right? Our lenses, our ways of measuring and understanding, and even understanding that knowledge exists, is very limited by a certain set of codes that we've been educated by. And thinking about, this onward march of technology, and I think about those that have the most abject lives so that we can have these technologies. And I'll just say the Democratic Republic of Congo and the situation there, if you've never looked into that, please do. Because it can't be about us just sharing out the pie better in America so people feel there's equity. There's absolute destruction of lives across the African world and indigenous peoples all over, from Brazil. We have to stop cutting down trees. We have to stop the rapid onslaught of the need to conquest nature. Nature gave us COVID-19, which then gave us the second pandemic, right? So these things are all connected. Right? We've got to allow nature to breathe again. We have put a plastic bag over nature's head and said, carry on, give us everything you got. Excuse my comedy moment, but that is what we're doing. That is what we're doing. It's untenable. And the idea we're just going to cut up this pie so that more people can have it and be more commerce, more consumption. It's not the one. It's not the one. I don't know what the one is, but that's not it. You've got to lift up the least of us to be able to find a way. What's that rhythm look like? What does that feel like? Wow, we've got heaven on earth. We don't have to go anywhere. We're done. Yeah. We've solved it. So that's my piece. That's my proselytizing for today.
No, but it's interesting. The things that people are saying about vulnerability that Anna just wrote in and that Indolin wrote in about choice making, ability to find inward, outward, and upward mobility. We're asking for that tension. The political power of being present and paying attention that Leah just wrote in. These are all things these are tensions, the tension between being brave and being vulnerable. That being brave is being vulnerable as an artist. That's your greatest work will be you at your most vulnerable. And so how do we resolve that tension? How do we keep, it's the same tension that when I hear the siren behind me now, and then I'll hear an ice cream truck. These are, this is the everyday life is filled with these tensions. And we have to be able to bring all of that into the work to have it be its fullest, and to be thinking of the lowest when we think of the highest. Yeah. And to be thinking of the most vulnerable people when we're thinking at our most expansive, our most expansive way of thinking about the world and about our work. So just going forward, we're running to the end of our session here. So maybe to leave you all with some things to think about, keeping that tension in yourself and trying to find okay with it, trying to find a place of stillness in the midst of that tension is okay. And as an artist, in a way, that's part of our calling.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think we should have a great group shot, everybody smiling, putting their hearts together, because that's what we're doing in this world. We're really, as artists, we get to speak differently from the politicians and everyone else who's trying to get the power. We get to speak differently through all these different registers. And here we go, breathing out. Let me take a screenshot of you all. And thank you so much, Peter Askham, the director of Next Fest, for taking the risk and pushing through. I say this to Peter daily on the text. I said, he's tired. I know he's tired. I say that. I'm tired, right? This, that, and now this. That he's, maintained this intention and created this opportunity. So thank you, Peter. Thank you for making this version of allyship and an amazing program. So just stay tuned, everyone, for the open conversations. And then the performance, I believe we're having a sharing. So we'll figure it all out. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Yes. Shoshana, Tyler, Brenda.
Thanks to all the choreographers and composers. Thanks, Deirdre, for being here. Yes. And please carry on,
Yes, keep improvising. Keep the joy in your stride. There is joy to be found, even in this moment.